Over 100 years ago, you could find this little dessert in bakeries all over New York. Today, it's almost extinct, but on Staten Island, one bakery has been keeping the tradition alive for 5 generations. This is the story of the Charlotte Russe, a disappearing New York dessert. Let's rewind a little bit. I was watching Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in America when there's a scene where a young boy, Patsy, buys this dessert topped with whipped cream and a bright red cherry, intending to give it to an older girl waiting upstairs. But temptation gets the better of him and he ends up eating the whole thing himself. But as I watched, I kept wondering, what is that pastry he's eating? The Charlotte Russe originated in Europe in the early 1800s and is often credited to French chef Marie-Antoine Carême, who named it after Princess Charlotte of Wales. The original dessert was a molded cake lined with ladyfingers and filled with custard or Bavarian cream. When it made its way to America, it evolved into something much more portable. New York bakeries began selling individual Charlotte Russes made with sponge cake, a swirl of whipped cream, and a maraschino cherry, all tucked inside a fluted paper cup. By the early 20th century, bakeries across New York sold them for just a few cents, and they became a childhood staple. There was even an incident back in 1921 involving a wagon full of Charlotte Russes that crashed in Harlem. Apparently, kids swarmed the wreckage and feasted on the desserts. But as neighborhood bakeries disappeared, so did the Charlotte Russe. As I looked up where to get one in New York City today, only one bakery kept popping up, Holterman's Bakery on Staten Island. So, was I going to travel all the way to Staten Island for a Charlotte Russe? Absolutely. Founded in 1878 by German immigrant Klaus Holterman, Holterman's Bakery opened before Staten Island was even part of New York City. Nearly 150 years later, it's still run by the Holterman family, making it the oldest continuously family-owned business on Staten Island. Holterman's is one of the last places in New York City preserving the Charlotte Russe, still making them the traditional way. A light sponge cake layered with raspberry jam, topped with a swirl of whipped cream, and a maraschino cherry tucked into its signature paper cup. You eat it kind of like a push pop, pushing up from the bottom. How does it taste? Like a childhood birthday party. The whipped cream is light and fluffy, while the sponge cake and raspberry jam at the bottom add a fruity burst of flavor. The Charlotte Russe isn't disappearing because it stopped being delicious. It's disappearing because traditions have a way of fading. Neighborhood bakeries close, recipes get forgotten, generations grow up without ever tasting the foods their grandparents loved. But every morning, places like Holterman's Bakery keep those traditions alive, and as long as someone keeps making them, the Charlotte Russe will always have a place in New York's story. So that's kind of interesting.